Okay, so this video is going to be on substance use disorders, and this will, I believe, be the last lecture of the class. Depending on when you watch things, I guess, and when we have the guest speaker and so forth next time. But this is the last topical video that I'm going to post, and we'll have our review session in person. But this is the last, dose of information about disorders you're going to get for this class. So here's the point. So we're going to do an overview of this group of disorders, and then dive into alcohol use disorders specifically, talk about the phenomenology, the etiology, the treatment of those, and then we'll get into some interesting controversy in the field, which is, are addictions a disease, yes or no? And I'll present, a view on each side for that one. So let's see here. That's good. So there's many ways to have a problematic relationship with a substance, because there's many substances. So there's different classes of substances. A couple of them are the first class I'll just deal with before I bring up any others is called depressants, and alcohol is a depressant. Also, depressants are sedatives or hypnotics or anxiolytics, they're called, like benzodiazepines would be an example of this, or barbiturates. I think that would include like horse tranquilizers or tranquilizers, whatever. This was, I'm currently watching the Netflix series called Queen's Gambit. I believe it's the most popular series in America right now, and it has a lot to do with these tranquilizers, which I believe are a type of depressant. But the effect of these is they bring you down, they relax you or calm you down below your baseline kind of energy level. That's what depressants do. Stimulants do the opposite. They boost you up, boost your mood or your energy level, more or less. This would include amphetamines, caffeine, cocaine, and nicotine. Then there's opioids, which go to your pain receptors. They make you feel really good, or they would do the opposite of activating your pain receptors. But they are very pleasurable, and they remove pain. And then hallucinogens and PCP and cannabis are the groups. Oh, and there's one more, inhalants, right? So huffing paint or whatever. So, as you know from your life growing up in society, you've probably heard of most or all of these, but you can develop a problematic relationship with any of them. Even, it doesn't matter if they're legal or not, legal or illegal. I tend to think it's, historical and weird reasons why some of these are legal and some of them aren't, and why is alcohol legal but cannabis isn't, although now cannabis is, right? And why did they make it legal and before it was illegal? Did cannabis change? No, it just people's opinion about it changed. When cannabis was illegal in the 70s, it was actually, when it was illegal in the 60s and 70s, it was a much, much milder form. Now cannabis is extremely concentrated and much stronger than it was, 50 years ago. But then it was illegal and now it's legal. So, alcohol has been legal and illegal at different points. Nicotine kills you. It's legal. So, it's interesting. But whether it's legal or illegal, you can develop a problem with any of these things. So the way we define that in the DSM is just some sort of cognitive or behavioral or physiological symptoms that indicate the person is continuing to use this substance even though it's causing problems for them. And the diagnostic criteria, whether you have cannabis use disorder or alcohol use disorder, they're a little bit different for each type of substances. It's important, though, to consider the difference between substance intoxication and having a disorder. So you may be intoxicated on cannabis, high as a kite, but you may not have a disorder. You might just be high that one time and really high, but it doesn't really cause a problem for you in your life. So you don't have a disorder. You just were intoxicated that one time, or maybe even multiple times. It really matters if it's impacting your life negatively. It can be tricky assessing this because people will maybe tell you they don't want to admit that substance use is causing a problem for them, so they might tell you it's not causing a problem. So sometimes you kind of have to override people's actual report if you say, well, it seems like it's causing a problem for you, even though you're not saying that. Your wife left you or whatever. Finally, there's also some addictions that aren't substance-based, and these are related to substance use disorders, such as gambling disorder. A lot of people, gambling is becoming more and more popular with fantasy football and that kind of, or fantasy baseball or basketball or golf or whatever, and that's merges to just straight up betting on sports and other forms of gambling, casinos and stuff, and that's can really wreck lives just as much as abusing a substance. Likewise, internet gaming disorder, which is not officially in the DSM, but it's something that may be added to the DSM eventually, is being addicted to computer games, or just addicted to the internet. There's internet addiction too, including pornography or sexual addiction. Harvey Weinstein, when he was being tried for the multiple offenses that he committed, sort of tried to plea this. He said, I have a sexual addiction. It's not my fault. It's beyond my control. It's a disease. And he tried to get out of it with that plea, which was not successful, I don't believe. But yeah, these things are can be just as powerful as substances. What these things all have in common, substances and addictions like internet gaming or pornography, gambling, they're all things that are really hijacking these ancient reward systems in our brain. When I say ancient, I'm referring to evolution, that go back way far back in the evolutionary tree that we've descended from. And our ancestors a long, long time ago, and all the animals that have come from those ancestors all have this same wiring of reward. When something good happens, when we get a lot of money, or we get a lot of new stuff, or when we kill the enemy, or when we have sex, or when we feel pleasure, which some of these drugs do. All these things are extremely rewarding, and our brain is wired to do that thing again. That was awesome. You just won the evolutionary lottery, brother. You're going to pass on your genes because you just got all the money, or so you're going to be secure, you're going to survive, and people are going to want to mate with you. Or you did just mate with someone, do that again. You're going to have children, pass on your genes that way. These are all things that are essentially tapping into the most crucial aspects of our survival as a species, of reward. And they're all ways to kind of tickle that funny bone of our reward system in our brain, and it gets a life of its own. So let's talk for a little while about alcohol use disorder, because this is, I don't know if it's the most common one, but it certainly might be. It's extremely common, and I know it's even more common now during the coronavirus pandemic. A bunch of these addictions, I'm sure, have spiked as people get out of their routines and are isolated and stuff, that they can develop unhealthy relationships with substances and these other behaviors. So what is alcohol use disorder? Well, it's just a problematic pattern of alcohol use leading to some sort of impairment or distress. So again, using alcohol in such a way that it causes a problem for you, causes pain or causes dysfunction. And you have to have 2 or more symptoms over a year period. And the way it works is it can be mild, moderate, or severe. If you have 2 to 3 symptoms, you're mild. If you have 4 to 5, you're moderate. And if you have 6 or more, you're severe. So before we get into that, let's just talk about alcohol intoxication for a second and what that is. So, the notion of, hey, let's have some drinks, and like you're out with your friends. Sorry for the terrible resolution on this picture. Having some drinks and having some fun, and it's your inhibition is minimized a little bit. So remember from the antisocial personality disorder lecture, we were just talking about the frontal cortex and inhibiting yourself. Oh, I want to just go like say hi to that person, but what if they don't like me? Your frontal cortex is inhibiting you. Alcohol shuts that off. So you you don't inhibit yourself from going and saying hi to that person. You just go and say hi to that person, and it's lovely, and it's a great social facilitator. So look at these people having, raising a glass together. So that's phase one of alcohol intoxication, this disinhibition. Phase two is depression, and that's why alcohol is a depressant, is if you keep drinking, it lowers your energy levels, it shuts off. It starts by shutting off your frontal cortex, but it more or less shuts off more and more parts of your brain until you're just like ready to go to sleep, like to pass out, blackout drunk, blackout drunk really is if people get to the point of being blacked out or they don't remember last night, type of a thing. That's because alcohol had more or less shut off their hippocampus and other parts of their brain that are forming memories in the long-term memories. So the things that they did, part of their brain was working so they could still like do stuff and behave, but the part that is consolidating memories was not working. So that's why they don't remember, because they didn't form the memories while they were doing the stuff. So that's the depression phase, where it's alcohol shutting down so much of your brain you're really just getting ready to pass out. And severe intoxication would occur, when you're continue to drink so much that you're way beyond just disinhibited or even depressed. You're putting yourself at risk of damage to your body. So that's what it's like, to get drunk or whatever, or to drink alcohol. And you could get drunk and not have an alcohol use disorder. Many people do. But let's talk about now what the disorder does look like. So remember, you need at least 2 of these symptoms, 6 to be severe. And there's, again, a few different families of symptoms, like the past few disorders we've been talking about. So the first one is impaired control, and it's these 4 symptoms. So if you had all 4 of these, I guess you'd be moderate already, right? But impaired control, so in other words, you're trying to control your drinking, but you don't do it. You lose control. So you take more alcohol than you intended. So you say, I'm going to go out for 1 drink with my friend. You end up having 5. You try to cut down on your drinking, but you can't. You spend a lot of time obtaining alcohol or using alcohol or recovering from its effects. So it's taking up a lot of your life. Or you have cravings or strong desires to use alcohol. So that's impaired control. That's 4 symptoms right there. Then there's social impairment, and there are 3 under that. So recurrently using alcohol such that it messes up your obligations in your life, in school or with your family. You don't coach your son's baseball team that Saturday because you were drunk or you were hungover from last night when you were drunk. Continuing to use alcohol despite persistent interpersonal problems. So your wife really doesn't like it, but you keep drinking. She's threatening to leave you, but you keep drinking. Or you give up, certain things. I used to go for runs in the morning, but I gave it up because, I drink every night and it's just tough to wake up in the morning. That would be 3. The next one is risky use. There's only 2 here, but basically that's drinking and driving, for example, using alcohol in a situation where it would be dangerous to do that, or operating machinery, going for a nice swim in Koi Pond while you're hammered and you drown, or you could have drowned. And then the second symptom is knowing that it's causing a problem for you, but you keep using it anyway. It's causing a psychological problem, like it's making you depressed, but you keep drinking anyway. And the next one is pharmacological. So this is like, this just means like basically tolerance and withdrawal. So your body is getting used to the alcohol. So tolerance means, you need more to get the same buzz as compared to when you started. Or, you still drink the same amount as you used to, but you don't even get buzzed anymore. You used to, have 3 drinks while you were watching the Patriots, and now you can't even feel those 3 drinks. That's called tolerance. It's often sort of a badge of honor among, heavy drinkers. Is like, yeah, I can drink so much and I don't even notice it. But what that means is your body is getting used to this because you're drinking a lot. It's not really a good thing. So withdrawal. is when you stop drinking, and then that causes symptoms for you. So get the shakes or whatever, sweaty, or you know that if you did stop drinking, you would get those symptoms. So you keep taking a little bit of alcohol to prevent the withdrawal. So that would be withdrawal also. You're going to get withdrawal if you stop. So you could have that symptom. Even though you don't have a lot of it, you know that if you did stop, you would get it. That would count. All right. So let's talk real quick about the prevalence. So how many people actually drink? So in the past, this is from your textbook actually. So this is just in the past 30 days. About 50% of people had some alcohol. And 30% of men binged. And 15% of women binged. And that would be 5 or more drinks on one occasion. Yeah. And then heavy use is binging 5 different times. So, if you have 5 drinks 5 different times in the last 30 days, that's considered heavy use. And 10% of men do that. Maybe 5% of women do that. So it's fairly common. Again, a lot of people drink, but much fewer are in this place where they're drinking a lot, many times. You can see that this is a little complicated, so try not to get overwhelmed. But this is just showing different age groups, how many people do heavy use versus they binge versus they use alcohol but they don't binge. So if you look at your age, 18 to 20, well, that's a little skewed because you guys aren't even legal to drink. But once you get to the next stage, 21 to 25, now you're legal to drink. This is like the sweet spot for drinking. 70% of people, use alcohol when they're in that age range, when they're legal to drink and they're still very young, right out of college. But what is it? About 25% of them are just using it and not binging. Another, I'd say 35% are binging, and then 15% in that age group are heavy use, so 5 or more drinks on 5 occasions per month. And then you can see it kind of goes down. All those things shrink. Alcohol use doesn't shrink as you get older. That actually probably grows a little bit, but the binging and the heavy use both shrink as you get older. Kind of start to take it easy with that stuff. So a lot of times, it's a developmental thing in our country is, going out, especially, you're at Gordon, there's no alcohol allowed here. So I really don't know what the culture is if you guys sneak it or not. But when I was a student, I didn't really run into alcohol when I was here. When I became 21, I would go, to the 99 and have a beer with my roommate or whatever, but there wasn't too much here on campus, and I wasn't really going to any parties or anything at that time. But when I graduated and was living with friends and stuff, this was the time for me to figure out alcohol and experiment with it and see what worked for me and stuff. And I think for a lot of people that involves in our society, it involves drinking a ton and binging from time to time and getting drunk and throwing up, and then you kind of realize that's not that fun, and you kind of grow up a little bit, and it's not a problem for you. But there's some people that aren't able to get out of that stage, that they're stuck in the binging, and they can't hang it up, and for whatever reason it's still a big part of their life even as they get older, and those are the people who have an addiction to it. So why does that happen? Well, for some people, genetics is part of it. You can see the difference between monozygotic and dizygotic twins. Again, 50% concordance. We see that a lot for different disorders. 32% concordance for dizygotic. So there's not that much of a difference, but there is some difference between sharing your genes fully and sharing half of your genes with your twin. So there's something genetic going on here. Studies say 50% of the risk is genetic. I don't know if that's true. Here's a graph. Similar type of a study. This is, look this up if you're interested we can talk about it sometime. This is a study by is it Ken Kendler? Shoot, there's a famous epidemiologist at Harvard Medical School, I think, who does a lot of studies like this, where he basically surveys people and says, he finds out he'll do twin studies and stuff and find out how much genes explain something. So this is a study he did. I forget what the study was on. It wasn't on church attendance, but this was a part of the study. And what he's showing here is that, let's just look at adulthood to start. Yeah, sorry, I want to give you the legend here. So A is the proportion of variance explained by genes. So A is red. So church attendance in adulthood is more than 50% explained by genes. C is the proportion explained by shared upbringing. So in other words, if you and your foster brother were both raised by the same family, but you had different parents, those parents affect very small amount of church attendance when you're adults. They explain a lot of church attendance when you're a kid, but once you're in adulthood, very little. And then other experiences, in addition to, the shared parents you may have, explain the rest of the variance. So it's just crazy that a lot of the variance of church attendance is explained by genes. That's sort of hard to believe, but these are the data. And it's similar for alcohol, is a lot of the variance is explained by genes as well. But I feel like I need to understand these studies better to really know what that means. But yeah, there's probably some genetic contribution. Take-home message of this slide. How do we treat it? Well, there's one way is AA. This is the most common way to treat it, and it's called a 12-step program because there's 12 steps in AA. And it's a disease model. So in AA, they really believe that alcoholism or alcohol use disorders are a disease. So you have this biological or psychological deficit, and that leads you to completely lack control over alcohol. Alcohol controls you. So the only way to live a good life if you have that disease is to be completely abstinent from alcohol. You have to admit that you're powerless over alcohol, and you have to confess the wrongs you've done because of alcohol. You have to rely on social support, mentoring relationships. You have a sponsor, someone else who's further along in the recovery process than you, and you're constantly checking in with that person. And you identify as a recovering alcoholic. You're never cured. You're an alcoholic still, but you're in recovery if you're not drinking anymore. And a lot of this is spiritual. There's a lot of talk of higher power and God as you understand him, and giving your life over to God. It's a very Christian thing. I mean, they try not to be too specific so they can be inclusive, but basically, it's very friendly to Christianity. A lot of Alcoholics Anonymous groups meet in churches. So this is one model. And sorry, ignore this. Ignore this slide. This was left over from last year when this was between lectures, these slides. So quickly, this is just the thing I was mentioning a few minutes ago, the notion of all these disorders produce an enormous fitness signal. We evolved to repeat things that produce those signals, like food, sex, winning a battle, fixing pain. So drugs and gambling and video games and pornography all hijack these ancient reward systems. Okay. So AA thinks addiction is a disease. And some neuroscientists think that too. So, some neuroscientists would say, and this was in the Ashbrook podcast I had you listen to, that prolonged use of drugs or alcohol results in brain changes that amount to the throwing of a metaphorical switch. So it's like turning something on or turning something off. And drug use, because it damages the frontal cortex, it is damaging the brain's braking system. Remember we talked about Phineas Gage and stuff, and the frontal cortex and what it does. It helps us to inhibit. So if you're taking a drug or you're drinking alcohol in excess, is damaging your frontal cortex. That's damaging the very thing that would allow you to stop, right? So that makes sense to me, that it is like a disease. It's a biological thing. You're taking this drug, which is damaging the part of your brain that allows you to stop taking the drug. You don't have brakes anymore in your car. You can't throw on the brakes because you damaged them. It's not your fault. And that's why chronic relapsing use tends to be the pattern. So in addicts, it's a chronic course. And this is the brain of a gambler. I guess I only have one label here, but this is different activity in the brain of someone who's a pathological gambler versus not. So that's one view. Now another view, though, is that it is not a disease. And this is the view presented by Gene Heyman in the podcast. The view here is that it's not actually a chronic relapsing condition. So that is an assumption made by many people, or many people think that's true. Even some neuroscientists, many psychiatrists, psychologists think that's true, but it's not true. So actually, the average addict hangs up their addiction, stops being an addict in their 30s. And it's no coincidence that, when people are in their 30s, this is the time when they're deciding to have kids, or, starting a family, or getting married and stuff, or they're focusing on their career. And that's the point in life when the average addict stops being an addict. And there's no treatment that's necessary for that. It's just people stop on their own, on average. So this is a graph. This is kind of like one of the graphs I showed you for borderline personality disorder, looking at the time since the onset of dependence, substance dependence. How long does it take for someone to be in remission? And, with cigarette remission, after 10 years, only about 15 or 20% of people have remitted. So most people who are addicted to cigarettes are still smoking cigarettes 10 years later. 85%, 80 or 85%. 20 years later, still 70% of people are still. So cigarettes are the toughest one to quit, really. In that regard, it's the least likely that you're going to have remission with cigarettes. But let's look at alcohol. I mean, alcohol, if you're drinking heavily or you have severe substance use disorder, let's say, 10 years later, 40% of people have remitted. 20 years later, more than 50%. 40 years later, 80% of people have remitted. And usually, this is something that has an onset when you're in your early 20s or teens. So, by the time you're 50, there's an 80% chance you don't have a problem with it anymore. Granted, that's a long time. But if we look at the 50% line here, it's for 15 years. So if you think from 20 to 35, again, people are hanging it up on average when they're 35. And cocaine and marijuana are more hopeful. They have a faster remission rate. So in 10 years, 70% of people who had a problem with marijuana don't anymore, and 80% of people who had a problem with cocaine don't anymore. So, and that's, these people weren't necessarily in treatment. That's just people stop on their own. So it's actually not a chronic condition. This is another argument for that. Looking at, this is a famous study by Lee, I forget her last name, but it was on Vietnam vets. And in Vietnam, soldiers that were in Vietnam, a lot of them ended up getting addicted to heroin over there, because heroin, grows on trees over there. It's everywhere. Actually, I guess it grows in poppy fields, but you know what I mean? Like it's it's all over the place. Everybody's got some heroin over in Vietnam. At least they did in the 60s or 70s when the war was happening. So a ton of soldiers got addicted. Let's see if we can understand this. So the main thing right now is ignore these black dashed lines. Let's look at the other two, the white circle and the white triangle. So this is showing narcotic use in the 8 to 10 months after Vietnam by men who were addicted in Vietnam. And most of them are not using anymore in the 8 to 10 months after Vietnam. 20% of them using a little bit, 10% are using a lot, and 5% are quite addicted still. But keep in mind, that means 95% of them weren't quite addicted. So I forget, this must be whether you did a positive drug test at some point or not, but the two groups are the same. So let's just lump them together. This is all soldiers who were were addicted to heroin when they were in Vietnam. Vast majority are not using heroin at all. There's another 20% who are using a little bit. So this is, 85% of soldiers don't have a problem with heroin anymore. But they were addicted in Vietnam. Now, how can that be a disease? What other disease do you know of where you move to another country and the disease goes away? If you had a problem, if this was really a disease that, your frontal cortex is turned off and, it's damaged your frontal cortex and you can't stop, your brakes are broken. Well, why aren't they just going out and getting the heroin when they get back to Chicago or back to San Francisco or wherever they're from in the United States? They're not doing that. And that's very interesting. So that's part of the argument. This study here with these Vietnam vets would make you think it's not a disease. Now, this is a group of patients who had a lot of other problems, and they tended to continue in the addiction. Few of them were not using at all, and fewer were using lightly. Another 15% were using heavily, and most were addicted. So addiction, when it is a chronic course, tends to be in people who have a lot of other problems too, like mental health disorders. For the average person who may not have any other problem besides addiction, it is something that tends to remit on its own in your 30s. So that's the story. View one, view two. Is it a disease or not? And I hope you enjoyed the podcast with Tom Ashbrook hosting Gene Heyman and some other experts. Let's quickly talk about treatment. So there's pharmacological treatment for alcohol use disorders. You can take benzodiazepines, which manage withdrawal symptoms if you have withdrawal, and you can take naltrexone, which is helpful for reducing cravings. You can also try to prevent relapse with antabuse, which basically makes you puke whenever you drink alcohol. So it's like doing some conditioning on yourself, classical conditioning to make you not like alcohol anymore. For opioids, there's methadone maintenance. You go to the methadone clinic and basically take, methadone instead of heroin. Methadone is slightly better than heroin in terms of being bad for you and stuff. So that's a way to get off of heroin, is to just get on methadone. It's not ideal because you have to go to the methadone clinic and get your methadone and stuff. A much better one that's emerged is Suboxone. Suboxone is a pill you can take, and it's amazing because it fends off withdrawal. And that's the toughest thing about quitting heroin, is that you have this terrible withdrawal. You get really sick once you stop taking your heroin. So it's really, really, tempting to go back to heroin to make yourself feel better. Suboxone prevents withdrawal from happening, and it actually prevents you from being able to get high. It basically contains Narcan, which is the thing that you give someone who's had an overdose, who may be like on the verge of death. You give them Narcan, and it gets in there, and it gets the heroin molecules away from the things they bind to, and it makes it so that they're not high anymore, and it can save their life. But Suboxone contains that, so it makes it so that heroin can't get in there and get you high. So you could inject yourself with a ton of heroin if you're on Suboxone, and you wouldn't feel a thing. So it really makes it so that it's not a temptation because you know if you take it, you're not going to get high. Plus, you don't have withdrawal anyway. So Suboxone is a really great way to get off of heroin. People in AA, interestingly, and NA, Narcotics Anonymous, don't like Suboxone. They feel like, you have to completely be off of pills and stuff. And they think you need to be totally abstinent of any pill, including Suboxone, which is tough because Suboxone is really effective. I don't think it's perfect. I think that it may have side effects and stuff, but it's probably better than being on heroin. All right. Another quick aspect of treatment is called motivational interviewing. This is where you try to motivate someone. You do it interviewing, ask them questions so that you can increase their motivation to quit or to stay off of the drugs. So it uses a stages of change model from a theorist researcher called Prochaska. And the idea here is whenever you're thinking of any change, there's pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. And people who are in your office trying to get off of alcohol or whatever, or trying to stop looking at pornography, they may be anywhere along this spectrum. They may not think it's a problem at all. That means they're in the pre-contemplation stage. They think, it's fine. It doesn't cause a problem for me. I enjoy it. And they're not even aware of really, it might be a good idea to stop. So in that case, you're not going to get them to stop right now. You have to just get them to the next stage, which is the contemplation stage. Get them thinking about it. Like, I wonder, maybe it would be better if I stopped. Like if you could get them there, that would be a huge win. If they are there and they're thinking, I wonder if I should stop, then you're trying to get them to the preparation stage where you're preparing them. Okay, well, if you were going to stop, what would it look like? And kind of making a plan. And then if they're in the preparation stage, they're like, I need to stop. I haven't done it yet, but I think it's time, it's important. Then you help them to do the actions they need to do to stop. And then if they've already done that, you're just helping them maintain. So wherever they are, you just try and move them farther along. There's a few skills you can look up on YouTube. Motivational interviewing, roll with resistance, reinforce progress. Those are cool. I'll let you guys check those out on your own. One cool one that you can use with someone you're trying to convince to do something is called the ruler exercise. So if you've got, let's think of an example. You've got a roommate, and you hate how the roommate, smells or whatever. Like your roommate doesn't shower, and it bothers you. But the roommate is maybe in the pre-contemplation stage, like they're fine with the situation. They don't really care. So what you would try to you could try this and say, on a scale of 0 to 10, how much would you like to smell better? And your roommate would say like a 2, and you'd be like, oh, interesting, a 2. Why didn't you say a 1? And what you're going to do is whatever they say, you say, why didn't you say a lower number? No one really ever says 0, so you got to phrase your question so that they don't say 0 or 1, whatever the lowest number is. But then you say, okay, why didn't you say 1? Why did you say 2 instead of 1? Then you get them to articulate the reasons that they do want to change, that they do want to smell better, or they do want to stop drinking, if you don't want to use a silly example. So the ruler exercise is a cool one to use whenever you're trying to manipulate another human being, hopefully for the good of them, like getting them to stop drinking, or sometimes for a selfish reason, like you have an issue with your roommate or whatever. Okay, I think that's where I'll stop for substance use disorders. Yes, indeed. Okay, very good.